Hello and welcome back, everyone. This is my follow-up to my documentary on Aaron Bushnell, and in this final part, I'm going to be examining how Aaron Bushnell was viewed in social media, in particular focusing on what influencers were pushing about him. I will be interacting with these ideas as they come up, but I intend to do that to go and show you how propaganda works, how Aaron's death has been used by various forces that want you to go and believe certain things. And to start, we have this post from Revolutionary Defeatism. Self-immolation is not suicide. Giving your life in support of a cause is martyrdom. It is among the most dignified ways to die. And that had 50,000 views. This is just a good example of what you're going to see throughout this. So you're going to see a lot of religious language, including religious language very often times being used by people who consider themselves to be secularists or far left. So that's going to be a very interesting point, and I'm going to go and note that whenever it comes up. We are also going to see movements like this where self-immolation is classified as not suicide now. You're going to constantly see Aaron's death being reframed as not suicidal because in Islam, of course, suicide is not allowed. And so to go and get Muslims, people who would be pro-Palestine on your side, they're outside of the left-wing or alt-right bubble, you're going to go and need to appeal to them in this way. So it's a very important point. And then finally, we're also going to get into how many people are promoting Aaron's action as noble, as heroic. And we're also going to see them essentially advocating for other people to go and do the same sort of thing, even if they aren't going to go and say that in so many words. The problem with all of this is going to be it's moving reality. So this guy does it in one way. Self-immolation is not suicide. Believe it or not, there's going to be a video that I show you later on where people are just going and claiming, oh, the embassy guards were the one responsible for Aaron's death, despite the fact that Aaron himself was the one who set himself on fire. So very much you're going to see alternative reality propaganda regarding Aaron's death. And this, to me, is the core issue here. Aaron Bushnell just considered as one person made a statement, but the issue is going to be how is that statement used by other people and what are they using it to go and promote. And this has been the primary reason why I've made this series, because I want to go and remove some of the mystique from Aaron. I want you to go and see who and what he was, what he believed, his various positions, and all of this sort of thing. And primarily, I want people to not fall for this martyrdom stuff. This is a very anti-life position. We've kind of talked about how idealism fundamentally ends in this anti-life celebration of mediocrity. And this to me is one of the key examples of that, right? Because a guy who ultimately did not accomplish anything except setting himself on fire is then going and being glorified because these people say, oh, that's a heroic action, when you look at this from the perspective of a real world situation, of reality. And Aaron killed himself. He removed himself from reality to go and make a statement, which is a very anti-life action. There's an interesting quote that the propagandist Jackson Hinkle was promoting from Hamas, and this quote states, "We love death as you love life." Just think about that. These are people who are so obsessed with the idea of martyrdom, of religiously going and dying for something and removing yourself from the world, that they say, oh, we love dying as much as you love living. And just as a natural creature, no creature in nature thinks this way. Creatures in nature will go and sometimes fight. They will go and give up their lives to go and further the cause of life. But that is vastly different than saying we love death. So a very, very important point to go and reinforce as we begin here. Before we get into all of the people that are going to go and support Aaron, that see what he did as noble and worth promoting, this is a guy, Jake Shields, who is an alt-right propagandist. He is very, very anti-Israel. He's very, very anti-Jewish. He'll go and pretend essentially that he's not anti-Jewish, and we're going to go and look at him. So he's going to go and say, oh, Aaron Bushnell is a bit dumb. His sacrifice is a bit dumb. But then he's also going to go and use this as a jumping off point so he can go and promote his own sort of propaganda. Let's talk about this. Quoting Jake Shields, what Aaron Bushnell did was stupid, but you need to realize some people aren't built for the evils of the world. Aaron joined the military to protect democracy and fight for freedom. In the past few months, he witnessed the biggest massacre since Pol Pot. Not only did America not step in to stop the massacre, we actively helped Israel. Realizing that he had fought on the side of evil and there is nothing he can do to prevent it was more than he could handle. Rip Aaron. That has 242,000 views. Very interesting comparison here. The biggest massacre since Pol Pot. Do you know what Pol Pot and his communistic regime in Cambodia did? So you're perhaps aware that Cambodia fought a war with Vietnam, the Vietnam that was controlled by the North Vietnamese government. And this was after the American-Vietnamese War. So the initiation of that war by Pol Pot was that he ordered the Cambodian soldiers to go across the border and massacre southern Vietnamese villagers. He took out about 1,500 of them. So just massacred 1,500 of them, and that got his country invaded by the Vietnamese. And do you know why he did that? Pol Pot had two elements about him. First, he was a complete nut job, but he was a Cambodian supremacist, so he believed that the Cambodians were superior to the other groups in the region. And second, he had an extreme... Well, this is something that you'd have to know the history of that area to go and understand, which is that the Cambodians had been on the receiving end of invasions from the Vietnamese and the Thais ever since their empire, the Khmer Empire, fell apart. So they basically had a major issue with the other countries in the area. This is incidentally why the French had gone and made Cambodia a protectorate, because they were asked to go in and protect the people by the Cambodian king at the time. So just to prevent the Thais and the Vietnamese from attacking them. So the Cambodians had a ethnic beef with the Vietnamese, and the way that Pol Pot decided to go and take that out was by sending his forces across the border and massacring a bunch of Vietnamese people. And keep in mind that this was when they were doing their insane experiment where they forced all the people out of the cities into the rural areas. So the economy of Cambodia was completely messed up. They'd gone and degraded their intellectuals and the people that actually could help that economy. So, and then he goes and invades across the border with the delusion that he's going to go and win. And so instead, the Vietnamese army, which I remind you again, this is the unified Vietnamese under the communist North Vietnamese Party. So they go and invade Cambodia and defeat the Cambodians. And they were actually very close to annexing Cambodia when the Chinese, who were allies of Pol Pot, went and invaded Vietnam. And the Chinese then basically they fought a retaliatory war against the Vietnamese. So massive casualties, and of course this is one of the conflicts that nobody talks about with Vietnam. Like your average person in the West probably doesn't even know that the Chinese and the Vietnamese had that war. But what ended up happening was that the Vietnamese plans for establishing a sort of Vietnamese hegemon over the countries in Southeast Asia, that ended up collapsing just because of that. And then the Cambodians, their system then got reformed, so they were less communistic in the end. And of course nowadays they have a king and they have a very different society. But the point is that to use Pol Pot and then to go and apply that to the Israelis is insane, because Pol Pot did what Hamas did. They're the same thing. They literally attacked across the border, massacred a whole bunch of people, and then, just like what happened back then, a bunch of these major powers, in the case of Vietnam, it was China and the US, believe it or not. And then in the case of Palestine, it's for Russia and China are on their side, and Iran. So these big countries go and try and step in and say, oh, how could you go and invade them? Well, meanwhile, these countries would do exactly the same thing if they were attacked in this way. If someone went to China's border and killed 1,500 people, the Chinese government would absolutely retaliate. Same thing with Russia. Same thing with the US. Same thing with Iran. This is the sort of thing that countries are expected to do. They're required to do by their laws to protect. No matter what they say about foreign engagements, if people come to their country and attack it, they get retaliated against. And so, Jake Shields, once more, you'll see that we have the side of evil. Again, he's a right-wing person trying to appeal to right-wing people. And so he's going to go and constantly throw in this sort of religious language. The concept of absolute evil here, and applied to the West, this is going to be a very consistent propaganda line that we see. Aya Hijazi, a hero and a martyr. May his death not be in vain. May it be a wake-up call where we see the end of the genocide and the start of a free Palestine. Rip Aaron Bushnell. That has 710,000 views. I've had to censor this thumbnail a little bit just because it showed... I'd rather if we could show you these sorts of things and let you take in the full gravity of actual violent actions, but unfortunately we have certain terms on YouTube, and so I can't really show you that. Regardless, so you see here a hero and a martyr. We're actually going to see in a moment how she describes herself. For the disempowered, feminism, BLM, Free Palestine, former political prisoner, MPA, Harvard. So, yep, exactly what you would expect. And of course, another person from a major elite university who is going and promoting the opponents of the West. This is going to be something that we see very consistently throughout. To 132,000 followers. One thing I'll note just when I'm talking about the follower numbers on Twitter, do keep in mind that Twitter is a site where at least half the traffic that you're getting on these sorts of profiles, half of the people that are going and following you are fake. They're not real. So any of these follower counts are going to be greatly exaggerated. I can tell you just from my experience that I get, like, it's at least half the followers that I get that I have to go and remove simply because they're not real people. They're basically networks of bots that are either designed to go and monitor specific people, or they're designed to go and send you links to various sites where you're going to get a virus, or they want to go and sell you erotic material, that sort of thing. So these are the things that you extremely commonly get on Twitter. And yeah, so just keep that in mind, that their reach is exaggerated, but a lot of these people do still have some organic reach at least. So you'd say that for this sort of person, perhaps like 60 to 75,000. And of course, technically, I should also mention that it is possible to go and buy major accounts on Twitter and then go and change the name of it, go and change the little tagline that you have for it. So yeah, it's other things that can happen. Not saying that's what happened here. This is probably just a lot of traffic for someone who is constantly promoting concepts around Palestine. But just keep that in mind. So inorganic bot traffic is a very big issue on the internet, and it means that a lot of people are exaggerated. And of course, people who want to go and boast about the exaggerated numbers are going to go and remove bots. And of course, with this sort of follower count, when you are in the tens of thousands, you're of course not going to go and look at whoever is following you. So you're going to get greatly exaggerated numbers. And here is an interesting example of someone who supports a cause and understands absolutely nothing about them. So you see here a image of a crucified Jesus. Let me tell you that in Islam, Jesus was never crucified. What happened in Islam, and this is a adaptation from the Gnostic account of what happened with Jesus. So Muhammad says that Jesus was not crucified. What happened was that when the Jews went and seized him, Allah made one of the Jews look like Jesus and then concealed Jesus. And so instead of it being Jesus who was crucified, it was a random member of a Jewish mob who got crucified. And meanwhile, Jesus slipped away and then ascended to heaven. So Jesus in Islam actually never died, and they celebrate Jesus for his life, not for his death, which is completely unlike Christianity, where the thing that is most celebrated about Jesus is his death, which is you're constantly seeing that with the imagery of the cross everywhere and all of that. Which is to say that these people, though, have absolutely no idea what Islam teaches. They want to go and say, oh, we're totally cool with Muslims, we're supportive of Muslims, have absolutely no idea what the actual teachings of Islam are, and they just want to go and hop on a trend and be praised for it. We see here that this person says, this was virtue signaling and totally performative. Clearly he was mentally ill and shouldn't be treated like a martyr. Of course, the other issue with all this is that Jesus did not go and set himself on fire or kill himself. So technically, see, there's a metaphysical way that if you go and believe in the Christian metaphysical account of Jesus, where he was the Son of God and was all powerful and could do miracles, well then, yes, essentially the crucifixion could be portrayed as sort of a suicidal self-martyrdom. The reality, of course, being that if Jesus did indeed exist, he was basically one of John the Baptist's followers, who then went and started his sect after the death of John the Baptist, and would have then ended up being crucified for sort of being a rebel against the Jewish system at the time, the Jewish Herodian kingdom. That would have been fundamentally what he was crucified for. And of course, without that sort of miraculous power, which was, of course, attributed to him later, well, he technically wouldn't have been a martyr and wouldn't have said he wanted to go and die. It just would have been something that happened. He did, however, apparently leave behind the idea that he was going to go and rise from the dead, so that's why you see the resurrection also greatly emphasized in Christianity, but of course that comes after the shock of him dying and not having the powers to go and prevent himself from dying. And this post incidentally had 85,000 views. By the way, one thing that you can also look at for a Twitter metric is, so you see on the far left, that's the comments. Then there is the reposts. So comments on this post have 40, reposts have 444, likes have 3,000. That's where the heart is. And then the viewer traffic is listed with that little bars, in which case it's 85,000. So one thing I'll say is that some of the posts I had were grabbed within minutes or an hour of them being up. So obviously they're not going to have the sort of traffic that those posts might have gone in their complete form. This one's pretty well, most people that are going to have seen it. You can tell that with the 7 hours there. So this is a pretty good example of where the traffic is going to be generally accurate. It might have been raised up to 100,000 or something by the end of the post's run. But Twitter being Twitter, it's a very transitory sort of social media experience. So you're unlikely to get major traffic on a post after it's been up for 12 hours a day, that sort of thing. All right, and here we have a good example of another phenomena that I discussed earlier. The Barracks, and you'll notice that that is a hammer and sickle symbol in their name there. We're constantly going to be seeing people who identify themselves as communists, social democrats, and that's separate from the Democratic Party. For the record, it's more like communism light, essentially, so social democracy. What you're going to see is that these sorts of people, despite the fact that they claim to be super secular and the children of the Enlightenment and all this other stuff, they're going to constantly be using religious language about Aaron. So here we see martyr. This is one of the keywords that I was looking for. Came up with numerous posts that were using this sort of terminology from these sorts of people. We're going to see good and evil and all of this sort of thing used to describe these concepts. All right, so let's read what the Barracks has to say. Read this carefully. The martyr Aaron Bushnell didn't set himself on fire to make a statement about Palestine. It was because the Department of Defense was compelling him to participate in the genocide. He was being deployed to Israel, and the orders read mandatory. So, of course, well, there's a few issues here. You'll note that in that unclassified bit there, it says 21st of November, 2023. It's hard to say whether this is an actual legit order that we are seeing here. Now, secondly, the other issue is that he's not participating in the conflict. What's happening is that the U.S. is transferring ammunition and that sort of thing to Israel. So specifically, very often aircraft bombs, sometimes artillery shells, these sorts of things. And this is primarily what the U.S. is doing for the conflict. So it's not participating. You're going to see this idea of, oh, the U.S. is sending troops into Israel. Much later when we get to Candace Owen, she uses Aaron to go and claim that exact fact. That is entirely incorrect. That's a false fact. The deployments that are going to Israel are via transport and supplies. So he's not being asked to go and kill anyone. He's being asked to go and deliver weapons, potentially. And this is how the Barracks describes themselves. So hammer and sickle again. Multipolar minds, non-Euclidean intelligence, current events, spaces host. 17.5 thousand followers. Multipolar minds, I dealt with the meaning of multipolar previously. Basically, it's a fancy way of saying that the Russians and their buddies want empires all over the planet where they get to go and dominate all of the nearby countries and make them go and become subservient to the bigger countries near them. That's what the multipolar idea means. It's not, has nothing to do with freedom. That's what they're trying to establish. And of course, they then put that up against their alleged enemy, which is the global hegemon, which they claim the West is, despite the fact that the West is made up of numerous independent countries. Yeah, so just stupidity. And of course, to talk about how the West is made up of independent countries, I'm in Canada, and remember, I'm bordering on the most powerful country in the West, the US, and the Canadians do stuff that ticks off the US all the time. There have been times when, during the Pierre Trudeau administration, for example, Pierre Trudeau literally got banned from going to the US, and that was our prime minister at the time. That's just to say that the West does have a lot of disagreements in it. The West is made up of independent countries, and this multipolar stuff is the idea of a less independent world, a world where people are once more dominated by bigger countries. And of course, you're seeing the consequences of that with Russia, where they just want to go and steal a bunch of territory from neighboring smaller countries. We have Richard Medhurst here, who is a propagandizing alleged journalist. He says, "I'm live. Aaron Bushnell is a hero and a martyr. I am live to talk about what happened and how disgusting the media coverage has been." Of course, he's on Rumble. Rumble, for those who don't know, is Peter Thiel and a bunch of his other crony corporal Republican types. That's basically their crappy ripoff version of YouTube, and you just have to go to the front page. It's full of all this stupid conspiracist blather, and the stuff they promote manages to be politics 80% of the time, which is a complete turn off to anyone normal. So just utter and absolute stupidity. And what happens is that these sorts of people, like Richard Medhurst here, they get banned from YouTube for going and being themselves, which is to say they go and eventually crack and say something super violent or make a statement that is against the terms of service in some other way, and then they get banned, and then they go off to Rumble or one of the other various even smaller sites. So that's basically what happens there. And of course, Rumble is another one of those sites that goes and majorly exaggerates how many views you're getting on Rumble. Yeah. And this is how Richard Medhurst describes himself. Independent journalist, British, based at UN, lived around the world, international affairs, US politics, and the Middle East. He has 385,000 followers. One other thing I should also note is that I talked about the inorganic traffic on Twitter. Well, a lot of these people who are pro-Russian, pro-Iranian, pro-Chinese propagandists, they also get massive bot followers to go and give the impression that they're bigger than they are. Just these ones aren't the going and asking for to send you erotic material and that sort of thing. No, these are just fake people that have been created by bot networks that are operated by these various authoritarian regimes to go and majorly boost the sort of people that they like and then down boost the people that they hate. Yeah, which is just to say that this person probably has a decent influence, but not as big as you're seeing here. We have another post from the Barracks. Rest in peace to the martyr Aaron Bushnell. Free men choose to die hating their enemies and not fighting their battles like dogs. So it's more propaganda. And another interesting point that I really need to bring up here. You're going to constantly see images of Aaron enveloped in flames. Now, this again comes into the fact that these sorts of people have absolutely no idea of who they're talking to, no idea of what Islam is teaching. In Islam, hell, the underworld, is described as the fire. That's literally what they call it, the fire. And people are presented as going there and burning. And according to Muhammad, if you go and commit suicide, then you're going to be committing suicide like that for all eternity while you're in the fire. And you're going to be burning while doing it. So if you stab yourself to death, then you're going to be stabbing yourself to death eternally while you're burning in the fire. Of course, no, obviously this isn't true metaphysically. What that was is, of course, a piece of political propaganda to go and say, oh, my soldiers, you do not commit suicide under any circumstance. You go and fight, and you go and take as many of the enemy with you, even if you're in a hopeless situation. That's what I want you to go and do. That's what you're going to go and do. So much like a lot of the other things involved in Islam, it's very political. It's not metaphysical per se. Metaphysical Islamic teachings, that almost entirely comes from mystics who basically put out their own ideas using an Islamic framework, just the same way that Christian mystics went and put out their own ideas using Christianity as a framework, the terminology and language of Christianity, and in the Middle East it was the terminology and language of Islam that they used. But Islam, generally speaking, is almost entirely about the world in front of you, not about metaphysics, but it claims to go and order the world in front of us according to metaphysical doctrines, which is where Islam's going to run into problems, and which is where once you stop believing in things like prophets, or if you ask the question, well, how does a theistic God go and interact with humanity? How is it possible that you could even be sure that you're interacting with such an absolute infinite power? These are the sorts of things that make this metaphysical support fall apart. But of course, practically speaking, while enough people in a society believe in the metaphysical ordering of it, then you can't really break out, because they'll be the ones that hold the power and that have the authority to just stamp you out, even if they can't win the intellectual argument, which they, of course, can't. So that's just to say that this is yet another example of where people are going to go and portray Aaron in this way, and it sends a very, very bad message. And of course, it's coming from people who, if they talk about using Islam, they're really more hypocritical about it. All right, another interesting guy here. So Fergie Chambers. Before I get to his post, I'm going to go and read you his little bio. Fergie Chambers, and here we see he has the Palestinian, the Russian, and the Syrian flag in his bio, so gives you an idea of what he is. The uncompromising straight path, agitator, dad, writer, Muslim, class traitor, sports, radical funding. See, he has the little communist symbol as well, 11K followers. So this guy is the son of a billionaire, and he has several $100 million to go and throw around at various left-wing causes. So very much paralleling that Sri Lankan guy that is behind Code Pink, who also goes and throws billions around you to go and argue for supporting China and all this sort of thing. So this is someone who is involved with the Antifa. He's been intensively involved with the Stop Cop City movement. And yeah, this is who he is. And of course, He very rarely goes and faces any consequences for his actions because he goes and has other people do his dirty work for him. Something of a cult leader. And yeah, just the idea of someone who's an alleged anti-fascist going and supporting these sorts of regimes like Russia and Syria, absolutely sickening, just absolutely fake. But as we'll come to see, being fake with these sorts of regimes while claiming to be against fascism is, of course, a very typical thing for these people to do because they've gone and redefined fascism in such a way that it apparently no longer means supporting violent military dictatorships that have extreme nationalist aspirations, imperialist aspirations. So, yeah. Anyways, this is what Fergie Chambers said about Aaron Bushnell. Once more, thumbnail censored, just for YouTube purposes. Aaron Bushnell died a martyr's death, the greatest hero the U.S. Armed Forces have produced in quite some time. May God rest his soul and reward him greatly in the hereafter. So yeah, we have a couple of things here. So of course, martyr's death for suicide. This guy absolutely hates everything about the U.S. military and the U.S. police system. So of course he's going to say that the U.S. soldier who killed himself was the greatest hero. Yep. Of course, this guy's heroes are all murderers and evil people. And then we have his little fake Muslim spiel here. Oh, may God rest his soul and reward him greatly in the hereafter. This is something that you've seen these sorts of far left types do very frequently nowadays. They go and convert to Islam for the status boost. We just saw Sean King go and do that exact same thing. So just, again, absolute fakery. These people are just out for whatever gets them the sort of political boost. And people on the left have apparently decided that betraying the Enlightenment and going and following an absolutist religion is apparently the best way of going and communicating that they're leftists, which is something that absolutely doesn't make sense. But you know what? We're very quickly going to come to the conclusion that this whole left-right business isn't how politics works nowadays. How it actually works is that you have people who are pro-absolutist, and this includes everyone from the secular absolutists, so someone who is, for example, a member of the Chinese Communist Party, to the sort of religious absolutists that you get involved in hardcore Christianity, hardcore Islam, these sorts of places. And these types are all coming together in, as Pepe Escobar put it, a sort of cosmic alignment. Yeah, they're basically all following the same sort of doctrinal teachings, which is what's important. The ideology that they're applying to the world ends up in the same place. And this is why so many people on this far left who want to go and rule society absolutely with absolutist doctrines, this is why so many of them have been going and embracing Islam, because it is a religion with absolutist teachings that requires you to go and believe very specific things, and goes and stereotypes everyone who doesn't believe those sort of things as being the exact same way. So you don't even have to put in thought about what and who you're opposed to. You just go and buy into all of this religious nonsense. Absolutely fake. A complete misunderstanding of the point of the religious allegory, which was to go and actually have the ability to go and see through the eyes of other people, not to go and insist that, oh, the state of oneness is oneness itself, where it's only one perspective that matters. No, the point is that when you reach the state where everything comes together, you'll see it coming together. You'll see it as a multitude of different parts, and then you can go and look at those different parts. And that's why in Hinduism, for example, they have the thought experiment where you examine the universe, examine reality through the thoughts of a god, as if it was the body of a god, and then you go to another god and you examine it in that way. And that's how you'll go and understand the perspectives of other people, that other people have different perspectives. And then that way you won't be inclined to go and persecute them, because you'll see when they talk about differences in religion, it's about different perspectives, how different people see the same sorts of realities. But no, apparently we're, according to our various left-wing fellows, apparently supposed to go and throw in our bags with Islam, which teaches that you should go and persecute the pagans wherever you find them. The only reason why you don't do that to the Christians and, well, not even the Jews anymore. So apparently we've accepted the Jews from what Muhammad said. So, but apparently we're not supposed to go and persecute the Christians because they worship the same God. They're just misunderstand him in so many different ways. But yeah, so those are your two options. You can either go and sling in with these guys and say that you want to be a religious absolutist, an absolutist in a secular sense, however you want to put it. I'm going to say that doesn't really even matter, because as we're going to see, these guys use so much terminology that comes from religion, they might as well be religious because that's their psychology. So martyrdom, 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 etc. Or you have the option of going and following the teachings of Brahman and Buddha and all of these actual metaphysical teachers who go and say, maybe we should go and think about what other people think. Maybe we should go and try and understand other people. Maybe we should be able to see the world through many different perspectives and understand it as being a multifaceted idea. So that's your choice. And I'm going to tell you right now, funny enough, there are going to be some people who think that they're following Islam and Christianity in the world, but who actually see the world through that lens that I just described, through the idea that everything is multifaceted, that you have to go and look at different people with different eyes. They have to go and see different perspectives, understand different perspectives. And they might call themselves under the banner of an absolutist religion right now, but they are with us in their hearts, where it really counts, and in their actions, because ultimately there is no Allah who has acted in the world. There's no prophet that has called down and said, oh, this is how order is going to come. These things are not things that have actually existed. What does exist is people's belief that that is something that happened, and that belief is what propels them to go and do certain things and act certain ways. But when that belief no longer holds, and when people go and act a different way, then that is when they have embraced reality, whether they understand fully the story of reality, the allegory of reality, they understand it. And that's why they should be embraced. And that can happen to people who are religious, non-religious, who are left-wing, right-wing, center, all these things. Different people can come together and understand. And when you find people who have that understanding, don't go and be divisive about it. Go and try and unify as much as possible. And that is how we will see different perspectives in the world. So you have two here. One from a person who is non-influencer, but I'll read them anyways, and one from a person who is an influencer. So, non-influencer first, Liam Treeboy. Imagine feeling so strongly about something you are willing to set yourself on fire to take a stand for what you know is right. Aaron Bushnell was a hero and a courageous martyr, and we can't let his dying words go unheard. Rest in peace, Aaron. Free Palestine. That has 7,000 views. And then we have Esmat Elhalaby. Peace to Aaron Bushnell. We add him to the rolls of yesterday's martyrs in Gaza. Of the nearly 100 killed, 2 fishermen shot off the coast of Khan Yunis, 7-year-old Heba Abdin whose home was bombed, and Mohammed al-Zayega, who's 60 days old, who died of starvation. Free Palestine has 168,000 views. So there you see a person who is presumably a Muslim and talking about Aaron in very religious language. Here's the problem, though. I'll actually go and bring up a Muslim person's comment on Aaron because I think it says it better than I could. So let me just do that quickly. All right, this is from Humam Abd al-Salam. Seeing an awful lot of Muslims on here saying he's a martyr. Aaron Bushnell did not die a Muslim, with his last words being of Allah, and suicide is very frowned upon in Quran and the Sunnah. He did not choose death over renouncing Islam. He is not a martyr. The point being there, as was stated, Aaron was not a Muslim. Aaron never pretended to be a Muslim. Aaron does not believe in God. You can go and see his post history. Aaron is extremely involved in the anarchist and Antifa ideology. So Aaron was not a religious person at the end. He had hyper rejected his parents' extreme conservative Christianity and then gone and embraced the extreme left-wing position. So very much a sort of person who has a tendency to go and embrace extremes. Unfortunately, given that before he was introduced to these sorts of extremely radical ideas, it did seem that Aaron had the potential to just go and be a sort of center-left person. And that would have, of course, been a very healthy thing for him to be. But unfortunately, he went and took his rejection way, way, way too far instead of going and being just a standard, normal sort of person. You know, the normal people who go and reject their parents' religion just go and adopt, left-wing view. Some people go other things. But anyways, that's just to say that's the normal thing what happens. And then Aaron goes way, way too far. So to say that Aaron is a martyr is incorrect. And then also to say that when you're talking about Palestine, that just being for Palestine means that you're for like this sort of Islam, that you're by nature thus a Muslim, is very incorrect. There are tons of people who are, again, these sorts of anarchists that actual Muslims would absolutely hate and despise, and they're for Palestine. So, and actually, if they had their way in Palestine as well, a lot of these groups, so a lot of them are still pro-Hamas, but if they had their way, they would definitely go for one of the alternative movements in the Gaza Strip. So there are various types of parties that go and augment Hamas, but Hamas is the ruling one and holds absolute power. So some of these other groups that are operating in Palestine were historically very left-wing, pseudo-communistic. But these groups, of course, nowadays will all bow to Hamas, and they've basically added their fighting forces to Hamas's campaigns. So that's what's happened. So, of course, Israel has a blockade over Gaza, shooing people to go and try and break that blockade. So there are going to be people who die that are civilians and all this against a war that's being fought in a very built-up area, a very constricted, built-up city area. So these are just the sorts of things that happen. And this is not good. This is stuff we don't want. We don't want to see civilians die in conflict. It's just that these sorts of the Hamas organization insists on fighting in cities and having their bases in cities and engaging the Israelis in urban warfare, which is really the only place where they could even have a chance at beating the Israelis, or more accurately, delaying the Israelis until well, I've talked about what their theory of the conflict is, which is they either succeed in pulling in the surrounding Middle Eastern nations to go and attack Israel, or they go and get the Middle East much more in the Russia-Iran sphere. This is the intention, or at least in the we're not pro-Western sphere, and this is the intention of Hamas. They don't really care about the outcome. The leadership is at its highest level, not in the Gaza Strip currently. They're in places like Qatar. Yeah, so this is just what you have to understand about the way things are working. So here we have an interesting interaction. Remember when I talked about how Jake Shields is mostly in that right sphere? Well, here you're going to see him in interaction with the Barracks, replying to that post from Jake Shields about Aaron Bushnell. And so the Barracks says, people don't understand how hopeless our men in the armed forces feel right now. The most attacked, denigrated group in America, and betrayed by their government to aid a genocide. Aaron Bushnell is a martyr, and we must make sure he did not die in vain. End all foreign aid to the enemy Israeli regime. 21.4k views on that. This is a account that is not an American account. This is an account that is a Russian person pretending to be an American. It's pretty obvious too. One of the things that you'll actually notice with all these tendency to go and sling around communist symbolism is that this is how Russian bot propaganda is trying to go and reach out to the left wing. So they conceive of the left wing as being pro-communist, and then also being obsessed with homosexuality and pronouns and transgenderism. So one of the amazing things you'll see on Twitter is that a incredible number of the people who are supposedly going and promoting Palestine, they are like these weird gay communists, transgender communists, this sort of thing. And it seems to me that, yes, people like that exist, but these sorts of qualities, like, that seems to me weird. I'm getting some vibes of how, if you've ever seen how Russian bot propaganda reaches out to the right wing, well, you go and look at their profiles, they have anti-pronouns or jokes about personal gender pronouns in their profiles, because conservatives at the moment are obsessed about that idea, right? So they say, oh, conservatives are obsessed about pronouns. We'll go and make jokes about pronouns or profiles, and then that'll be, oh, we like these guys, right? The conservatives will look at us and say, oh, we like these guys. And then to go and appeal to the left, well, the left is obsessed about pronouns, so we'll go and stick pronouns in our little profiles, and then we'll go and attach little hammer and sickle signs to them, and that way we'll reel in all of the left, the people who love pronouns and the people who are obsessed with communism still for insane reasons. And the last line here, that's what really gives it away, right? End all foreign aid to the enemy Israeli regime. This is entirely indicative that this is not someone who is from the U.S. Even if you hate Israel and you're in the U.S., they're not an enemy to the country. The sort of person who identifies Israel as the enemy, they're either in this sort of, well, they'd either be something like a absolutist Muslim, or they'd be someone who is in a country that is actively hostile to Israel. In that case, the country that is actively hostile to Israel in the area, countries like Iran and Russia. And this is something I've covered a while back with Alexander Dugin, who has a very interesting post on the subject. Here's the funny response from Chad Z. Chadwick. I'm in the army, and literally nobody feels like how you described, except for outlier goobers like Bushnell. So, very much just a blunt way of talking with this propagandist here. All right, here we have Jayson Gillham. Remember Aaron Bushnell, an unnecessary and utterly tragic casualty of U.S. imperialism, a martyr who gave his life in the fight for liberation. Let his death not be in vain. Free Palestine. And then this person is responding to a person by the name of Talia Jane, who is a major Antifa figure, Antifa reporter. And this is what she has to say. He is one of the most principled comrades I've ever known, said Xylem, who worked with Bushnell to support San Antonio's unhoused residents. So you'd see there that Bushnell was involved in the homeless community. And of course, for those who don't know, anarchists with the homeless community in the U.S., this is a terrible combination. Anarchists don't help homeless people. They go and feed into their worst habits. So anarchists are extremely supportive of drug use, the tent cities that they have, tent cities being allowed to go and raise up on the sidewalks and in parks. So basically, just like what anarchists do with everything else that they go and put in the public sphere, like they'll go and graffiti stuff, they'll go and have violent protests, they'll go and wreck your stores, and they'll go into your neighborhoods. These are people who are utterly and absolutely selfish. They go and support people who they identify with. They hate the vast majority of people in society. And so what they do with the homeless populations is that they go and they support these people, and they go and do that against the interest of general society. It's not to the interest of general society to have people shooting up on the streets and then going and lying or in a drug-induced stupor or staggering around in just a drugified, zombified state. But this is what the anarchists go and promote, because this is the sort of things that get classified as individuality by them. It's not individuality. They're going and encouraging the absolute worst habits of people, and they're then using that and saying, oh, this is what we're doing. Oh, aren't we so good and noble for doing this? And then whenever you see like a sympathizer who gets into the government area, well, then they start to go and prevent the police from taking care of these sorts of establishments. So just absolutely terrible stuff. And reality is that, so there's absolutely no practical reason why someone would actually have to go and be homeless. Like, there are shelters, there's government housing, which can be gone for very cheap. But these people, they don't want to go and participate or help in society. These are people who, I talk about the 50-50 idea in society, where you give 50% of your energy to society, and then society goes and basically collectively enables you to go and have about 50% of your time for yourself. But this is not something that these people believe in. So they don't give anything to society. They just go and take from society. And somehow these guys who claim to go and idealize villages, anarchists say they idealize tribal villages. Well, suddenly now people who only go and take from society, well, somehow if they're now these homeless populations, well, now suddenly there are things to go and advocate for, to go and work towards. And for those who don't know, Aaron, he had to leave San Antonio Collective Care just because he apparently didn't do good with internal relationships. All right, we have the NYC chapter of Dem Socialists. So once more, the Democratic Socialists, remember, this is different from the Democratic Party in the US. It's an entirely separate thing. They're usually involved with this organization called the Party for Socialism and Liberation. They don't win any sort of elections with that party, but what they do is they go and try and infiltrate politicians into the local level Democratic Party that go and sympathize with them. So that's basically their general stance on things and what they go and do. So Again, very subversive people. But anyways, this is what they had to say. Rest in power, Aaron Bushnell. Free Palestine. They had 850,000 views on that post. This is something that you're going to go and see a lot from, again, the left-wing types. So the classic sort of religious way of saying goodbye to someone is rest in peace. So, of course, the idea of heaven being a peaceful place, your legacy having contributed to peace in that. But with the left-wing types, what they go and do is they say rest in power. Well, that's about is your action then going and having an extreme influence, your legacy having an extreme influence on society and producing power for the people associated with you. So that's what they mean by rest in power. All right, so 2 influencers here and an interesting interaction. So first we have Charles Preston. A white man took his own life to show y'all literally what it looks like for a U.S. soldier to burn for his complicity in Palestinian genocide. He live streamed it. He called it not extreme when compared to what Palestinians face. And people are critiquing effectiveness. That post had 773,000 views on it. And to this, Charlie Tsai replies, a Buddhist priest burns himself to death. A Buddhist priest becomes a martyr. In English and Vietnamese, a monk shouted into a microphone. This morning, the images of Aaron Bushnell, the 25-year-old U.S. Air Force serviceman who self-immolated outside the Israeli embassy in Washington, D.C., have gone viral. Like Charles, I can't escape hearing him shout, "Free Palestine," as he burned alive. An act reminiscent of the Vietnamese Buddhist monk Quang Duc self-immolating on a busy Saigon street in June of 1963 to protest the Vietnam War. A key pivot point of the war. Journalist David Halbstrom wrote at the time, flames were coming from a human being. His body was slowly withering and shriveling up. His head blackening and charring. In the air was the smell of burning human flesh. Human beings burned surprisingly quickly. Behind me I could hear the sobbing of the Vietnamese who were now gathering. I was too shocked to cry, too confused to take notes or ask questions, too bewildered to even think. As he burned, he never moved a muscle, never uttered a sound, his outward composure in sharp contrast to the wailing people around him. So, first up, some interesting problems with this. Quang Duc did not burn himself to protest the Vietnamese war. Nope, Quang Duc burned himself to go and protest how Buddhism was being treated in Vietnam at the time. So what David Halbstrom did, and this is what you saw extremely frequently in the Western media that were covering the Vietnam War, he presented the situation as though this was a protest of the Vietnam War when it was not. And there were other examples of lies like this that were promoted about the South Vietnam government. So you had assertions that they were involved in massacres. You had one very prominent photo, which was a literal man who had murdered a family. And the photo was of him being executed by South Vietnamese soldiers, and then he was presented as a dissident in the Western media. That's how they present him. They lied. Western media, you have to remember, is full of people who are compromised. I'm not going to go and say, oh, Western media, the mainstream media is all bad, but a very substantial part of it is tainted by people who go and lie for ideological reasons or who go and distort the facts. David Halbstrom here distorted the facts. He reported to you about the self-immolation here. He lied to you about the purpose for it. So I'm also going to say that this is one of the problems I personally have with Buddhism, where I think that it's not bad in this way, in the sense that you oftentimes see in the more absolutist religions. So yes, it builds up willpower, which you see here. So unlike Aaron, this Buddhist monk was able to go and withstand all that pain without going and speaking, without going and saying anything. So he had very strong willpower. This is something that Buddhism can go and build up in people. However, it does come at the cost of the joy that you have in life. So in that sense, it's a very much a anti-life sort of philosophy, even as Buddhism teaches a greater sort of compassion compared to the monotheistic religions as a whole. And let's continue with what Charles Sy was saying. Not dissimilar to the images of vicious dogs, batons, and fire hoses wielded by bloodthirsty police beating and maiming nonviolent protesters challenging segregation in the South, the image of the monk burning himself to death as an ultimate act of civil disobedience shifted our nation's consciousness, if even so slightly. At the same time, South Vietnam's defiant de facto First Lady, Madame Nhu, cavalierly expressed herself before the cameras, claiming Duc had barbecued himself with imported gasoline. Mocking the monks, she offered to provide the fuel if they wanted to follow in Duc's footsteps, saying she would gladly stand by and clap. I see, that's a pretty ballsy way of putting it. So that's someone who is fighting enough more life-affirming than the persons who are burning themselves, even if that sort of mockery, you think that sounds very harsh. I mean, it is a challenge, right? So saying to the other monks, if you go and believe this so strictly, why don't you go and follow after his footsteps? Let's continue with Charlie Sy again. Likewise, right now you're seeing plenty of news Dragon Lady vitriol being expressed around various quarters of the internet in support of Israel's ongoing slaughter of civilian Palestinians, while attempting to dehumanize Aaron Bushnell. But Aaron Bushnell is too human for their peevish taunts, and his act of civil disobedience in support of Palestinians' humanity will far and away outweigh Israeli apologists' petty condensation. And they know that. They fully grasp the weight of this act, and they are hustling to shift the narrative out of fear and loathing. But they won't be successful. The power of Bushnell's self-inflicted death supersedes every shred of their petty tribalism, cowardice, and propaganda. Let's break that down. No, actually, we're not being petty. We're going and examining what Aaron actually said, what he did. And Aaron himself was, as I've exposed, frequently a very absolutist, tribalist, and petty fellow. He went and minimized and, as a matter of fact, glorified the deaths of 3 U.S. service people in Jordan. So it was 3 African-American service people, 2 women, 1 man, for those wondering. So, yeah, and when he posted their death notice, he posted it mockingly with "oh no anyway.jpg." Does that sound like a man who is extremely human? To me, that slaps as someone who is extremely petty and who has gone so far into absolutist tribalism that he cannot even see people he disagrees with as human anymore. So too human for their peevish taunts. I'm going to go and say that, well, obviously this person's never gone and looked at Aaron Bushnell behind the surface. He's never gone and looked at what made Aaron Bushnell who he became. Incidentally, there's also a difference between being an hyper-Israeli apologist where you go and say, oh, everything that Israel does is wonderful and great and blah, 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 blah. There's a difference between that and saying, well, Israel is doing what they have to do at the moment because they have to go and respond to an attack that happened upon their country. Anyways, and propaganda, well, I'm showing you right now how propaganda works, and this is a man who is a part of propaganda who ironically has gone and used a piece of propaganda to go and make his point here. Let's continue with Charlie. Moreover, it didn't go well for Mamdouh. It didn't go well for the American military establishment. It didn't go well for LBJ, who didn't run again. And of course, we got Nixon instead, whether we liked it or not. Aaron Bushnell, a U.S. serviceman, burns himself to death. A U.S. serviceman becomes a martyr. So, that post had 65,000 views. And AWACS Anthrax in the comments. Guy was protesting Buddhist discrimination, not the war. One sentence manages to go and bust this guy's entire argument. Crazy how they do it, isn't it? It's so simple to... And that's the thing about this propaganda. These guys go and put out stuff so rapidly, it's easy to debunk, but the issue is, by the time you've gone and debunked it, well, guess what? Suddenly, all these people that have seen it, they don't know that it's been debunked. They've just got it, taken the thing and run with it, which is why when you go and look at, for example, this idea that something crazy like 40% of young people are getting their news from TikTok, those are 60-second videos. You can't do anything in a 60-second video except make like a very, brief joke. You can't go and talk about any sort of serious issue in 60 seconds. That's impossible. That's not how actual in-depth examinations of topics work. But of course, hey, why not, go for 60 seconds? I don't have the attention span to go and look at anything beyond 60 seconds. Oh, that would require a very high amounts of thought. Oh, that would be awful. I'd have to go and put thought into it instead of just going and regurgitating what someone says happened and then just be like, oh, I'm just going to go and use my TikToks and blah, de blah, de blah. So easy to go and find out that what these people are saying is not true. It wasn't true with this guy's analogy. Jake Shields earlier with Pol Pot directly lied in analogous situation. Ugh. But anyways, this is what they want to promote, though. They want to go and promote people burning themselves to death as heroic actions. Absolutely not. This Quang Duc should not have burned himself alive. That was an absolutely terrible action. Just absolutely terrible. And what did it accomplish? It didn't accomplish anything. It went and, if anything, just demoralized a bunch of people and then got used as a propaganda campaign for supporting, in the end, what was probably the less desirable outcome of who won in Vietnam. So previously, I talked about that little crossover that we were going to have, and here it is. Cornel West, who self-describes himself as one of America's most provocative public intellectuals, a champion for truth, justice, and love, running as an independent candidate for president. All right, so basically Cornel West, one of the most currently emblematic figures of the far left in the US, one of their most prominent intellectuals. And so this is what he has to say about Aaron. Let's never forget the extraordinary courage and commitment of brother Aaron Bushnell, who died for truth and justice. I pray for his precious loved ones. Let's rededicate ourselves to genuine solidarity with Palestinians undergoing genocidal attacks in real time. Hashtag Aaron Bushnell, hashtag Free Palestine. And that had 1.9 million views. Okay. So first up, died for truth and justice. Nope. Did not die for either of those things. Justice is when the aggressors are defeated. Justice will be when Hamas is defeated, and it will remain to be seen whether Israel is capable of doing what is the final justice for the Palestinian people, which is setting them up with a state that will finally be able to go and have peace in that region. So Hamas is not a just force. We have yet to see whether Israel will be a just force. We, of course, believe that that's what will happen. We hope that's what will happen. We've yet to see what will happen in totality there. So anyways, we'll leave that for the moment. pray for his precious loved ones. You're going to see this again and again. Aaron Bushnell's parents, I remind you, so for starters, they're Christians. They hate the fact that he committed suicide. They want him to go and get mental health checkups, mental health support for his issues. So they did actually care for him. They still loved him, even if I think Aaron did not love them in return, and very much modeled himself to be their exact opposite. Aaron Bushnell's parents also support Israel. Just for those who were wondering, they support Israel in this current Israel-Hamas war. So yeah, this is going to be how they go and present things, which, once more, Hamas was the one who undertook a genocidal action. They went into Israel and they killed every Jew that they could get their hands on. That was a genocidal action. And Israel's military campaign, which is not genocidal, which is going and committing itself to an attack against a very specific armed group that attacked them, that also says it's its own country. Like, that's not genocide. Genocide would be if Israel went in and purposefully massacred Palestinians left, right, and center, didn't care if they were going and massacring civilians. These are the sort of acts that are considered to be genocidal in a war. So, for example, like what one of Hamas's biggest supporters, Russia, is currently doing, where they're trying to go and genocide the Ukrainians.